Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Dish,
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Lee,
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Clark,
Arbor.
Commissioner White.
Here in Ann Arbor.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. May I have a commissioner move to approve the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Is there any discussion of the agenda? All in favor, favor, raise your hand or say yes. That is all hands. So the motion carries. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the September 8th, 2021 meeting? Moved by Commissioner Gibb Randall, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please raise a hand or say yes. That's all hands now. All right, the motion carries. Item 5 are all of the reports. Let's start with Councilmember Dish, if you have a report.
Just one thing, and that is that the ordinance to remove, or the ordinance change to remove warehousing and indoor storage in C2B districts passed on first reading unanimously without even a twitter of comment.
Very good. Mr. Leonard, anything else to report? And then Commissioner Gibb Randall, you'll be next.
No report this evening.
All right, Commissioner Gibb Randall, you're reporting out.
Yeah, for DDA, just a bunch of different things as people, it's a whole group that comes in from different organizations, and it's always a great forum for hearing about different things happening. And so a couple of things that are kind of tangentially related. Let's see, that there is I don't know if people have been following the fact that there's a social district now that's been zoned downtown, where you can like carry drinks and things like that. So that's kind of important in terms of, how we're thinking about buildings coming in. The other big one is that the bus station on Fuller was rejected for grants. And so we are pretty much now set with the one down on Depot. And so I know we've had a few developments in that area. It's not that the city has decided we're doing Depot, it's more that we were deciding between the two, and the Fuller one got rejected. So by default, likely, I don't know that there's like a certain direction on that, but that's, the only two I think that were looked at in any kind of serious way. And, we've had some developments down in that area. This is what I heard from another city council person. So, anyway, that, has an impact on what we're looking at down in that area. Let's see, I think the other piece was that Division is going to have a two-way protected bike lane on it that's coming. And I think there may be a curb there as part of that. And then there's been some things are like issues around maintenance in some of these. And so the divider things may be different in the wintertime, things like that for plowing, so that we should just kind of know about. And then the other thing is, I know many of us are bikers, I'm just going to put this out there, is that the buses are having a really hard time turning at Fifth Ave onto William because the bikes are out of our green box. We're too far forward. And so just a reminder to all of us watching or that are participating in this meeting, stay in our green box as we come up to intersections, because it makes it really difficult for, all those turning radii have all been worked out and they've set it where it needs to be. And so we need to stay in our lanes. So just a friendly reminder to be able to do that. We also got a big presentation on the affordable housing piece from Jennifer Hall, and looking at the plans, as things are moving forward. Nothing that's terribly different than what we looked at before, but we've been in close contact with those projects as they move through. So that's it. Thanks.
Very good. Are there any other committee liaisons that have anything to report out? All right, seeing none, I'll move on to item 6, which is our first opportunity for public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about an issue that is not listed as a public hearing on this agenda. So tonight there'll be 2 dedicated public hearings, one for 2040 and 2060 West Stadium Boulevard, and the other for 1300 South Maple Road, the Grace Bible Church. If you wish to address the Planning Commission on any other matters, now is the appropriate time. To speak, you can press *9 if you're listening by phone, or if you've joined us through the web link, you can use the raise hand feature, which should be right below our pictures. For phone access, if you're watching us right now and want to dial in, the dial-in number is 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Mr. Leonard will select those who have raised their hands, calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number if you've called in, or by your name if you've joined us through the web link. In either case, you should hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And when speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Again, if you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, or if you've joined through Zoom, you can use the raised hand feature.
You are getting so good at that introduction, yet there are nobody taking you up on that offer.
All right, then we will move on. There's another opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. But first, we'll move on to the next item, which is 7 public hearings for the next business meeting.
Sorry, sorry about that. Yes, we have 1 new public hearing scheduled for the October 5th meeting. It is 3874 Research Park Drive, site plan for city council approval. It's a proposal to demolish the existing building and construct a 130,300 square foot research office building on this RE zone site. 5 lots are proposed to be combined for the development site, totaling 16.9 acres.
Very good. The next item is 8A. We're in unfinished business, and this is the 2040 to 2060 West Stadium Boulevard site plan for city council approval. This item was proposed to be postponed. Is that still true, Mr. Leonard?
That's
So
correct.
we will open the public hearing if anyone's called in and would like to provide. There's no petition, no presentations. We'll just go right to the public hearing.
Yeah, so just a quick update. As you are aware, the petitioner brought a proposal to the working session. They're still determining their next steps based on the feedback from that. So our recommendation in consultation with the petitioner is to postpone further consideration of the item until the November 16th regular planning commission.
All right, so without further ado then, I will open the public hearing. So this is an opportunity to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed development at 2040 and 2060 West Stadium, the special exception use and site plan. If you wish to address Planning Commission about this item, please use the raised hand feature if you're viewing through the web link. If you're watching us and want to dial in, the phone number is 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Per our usual, city staff will select callers who have raised their hand calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number, or by your name if you join through Zoom. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And hopefully that was long enough to allow for the TV delay.
Again, as lyrically poetic as you were, I see no indications of
All right, so we will move on. I'm going to read the motion. We're going to move it. And then what the staff recommendation is that somebody moves postponement. So the motion reads the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission the motion is actually the postponement. Never mind. I get to just read the postponement. So the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission postpones further discussion and consideration of 2040 and 2060 West Stadium to the November 16, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Moved by Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Lee. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. That is all of the hands, so the motion carries. We will see the petitioner in 2 months. On to new business. 9A is 1300 South Maple Road, Grace Bible Church site plan for city council approval. And I see the Hollywood squares moving, so Mr. Leonard is promoting the petitioner to make a presentation for up to 10 minutes. And then I see Mr. Kowalski Square, so he'll be providing the staff presentation before our public hearing.
We're going to have the petitioner present.
Yes.
project.
Yes. Good evening. Here, I'm gonna share my screen. All right. Good evening, Planning Commission. Thank you so much for hearing our project this evening. My name is Jason Van Ryn. I work for Naderveld. We are the civil engineers, surveyors, landscape architects for this project. Our office is located at 3037 Miller Road in the city of Ann Arbor. I am joined tonight by my colleague, Brandon Cheney, also with Naderveld, and Reagan Sims, and he is a representative from Grace Bible Church. Before I get started on the site plan presentation, I just wanted to give a brief history of Grace Bible Church in Ann Arbor. Grace Bible Church has been part of the Ann Arbor community for nearly a century. From the mid-1940s until 1970, their congregation occupied the building located at 100 North State Street in downtown Ann Arbor. In the early 1950s, Grace Bible Church began purchasing property along Maple Road, and by 1965, they had purchased all the remaining property, basically where our site plan that we're presenting to you today is located. In 1960, construction began on their new building, and by 1970, they had moved into their new facility that is currently located at 1300 South Maple. Over the next 45 years, not a lot changed on the site or with the building. It basically remained the same until 2017, when they constructed a new entryway or foyer that improved circulation around the front of the church building and provided a much needed gathering space for people to use as they came in and out of the building. As part of this project, several other improvements and upgrades were made to the building, including updates to the sanctuary, renovations to the bathrooms, and improving ADA access, and fire suppression was also added to the majority of the existing building. And that brings us to tonight and to our request that's before you this evening for our site plan. This is a rendering of our proposed site plan. And there are three main components that I want to just touch on tonight. The first of which is what we are calling the Family Center. It is a 30,800 square foot addition located off of the south side of the proposed building. So if you can see my cursor, this is the existing building here. The addition they did in 2017 is here. This is the proposed Family Center addition. The second major item that I want to touch on is parking. There are 107 proposed parking spaces that are shown here just west of the Family Center addition. And the third thing is the sanctuary expansion. which is infill. There's two existing courtyards on the north and south side of the sanctuary, which is right here, the existing sanctuary. And the proposal is to infill those courtyards to provide additional seating in the sanctuary. This site plan contains various other important elements. There's several that are worth noting. Increase site access to the south through two driveways, here and here, and ultimately to this shared drive that will outlet to, or that will connect to Pauline and Maple. This is Maple Road, Pauline. There's a signalized intersection there. Currently, there's only one access point to the site. These two additional drives will greatly improve access. We have a shared driveway agreement or access agreement with this Midtown project to the south. So this will greatly improve the traffic circulation around the site. Another important feature to note is that we are proposing a sidewalk connection, pedestrian connection from the South Maple public sidewalk along the north driveway to the existing building. Currently, there is no pedestrian connection. People that come or walk to this church have to walk up the driveway. And we are also providing pedestrian access through the Midtown site, through this shared ingress egress, to a sidewalk here that would give you access to the Family Center addition. And then I think lastly, I just mentioned that we are proposing stormwater management facilities. This will be a shared use detention system. It will actually be shared between the Midtown project and the Grace Bible Church project, but it is located on the Grace Bible Church project. This is a overall floor plan of the proposed Family Center addition. Important elements include a proposed gymnasium, a full-size gymnasium, youth program space. This serves the middle school and high school. And then children classrooms for nursery all the way through 5th grade, located in this area. There's also church offices, storage, several common areas for gathering, an indoor play area, and the main entry for this Family Center addition is actually to the west, out to the west parking area. It would be accessed here, but there are also internal connections to the existing building. There are existing hallways in this existing building that would be extended. So when they planned this original church building, they had a plan to expand it to the south. So it does make a lot of sense that these corridors line up. This is a bird's eye view of the proposed Family Center looking toward the northwest. This gives you an idea of the size and scale of the addition in relation to the existing church. This is the existing sanctuary, the addition they did in 2017. These are existing offices and classrooms. This is the proposed Family Center addition, the gymnasium. It is the highest point in the proposed addition. This is at 29.5 feet. This lower section here is where all the classrooms would be. And then the raised section that runs down the center is the entry to the west would be here. And then this is the corridor that kind of leads down the middle. This would be the indoor play area. There are windows proposed along just below the roof line to allow in natural light. This is a rendering of the west entry to the proposed Family Center building, kind of looking to the southeast. You can see the gymnasium in the background. Full height windows are proposed within this vestibule area just to allow natural light to flood into the space. Stepping through the main entry, this is an internal view of the center corridor, I guess, looking kind of toward the east, towards South Maple. The proposed design allows for maximum natural light and flow throughout the space. This entry was designed to mirror the entry that was done on the front of the church in the 2007 edition, just to kind of tie everything together. The next major component of the site plan is the 107 additional parking spaces that are proposed to the southwest of the proposed Family Center building. The existing site currently has 232 parking spaces. There's kind of 3 separate lots, if you will. The lot here north of our driveway, this is Hanson Nature Area. And I think Matt noted in his planning report that we are working on an agreement with the city to allow this to be used for people to park that want to access the Hanson Nature Area. And then there's another fairly large parking lot here, and then around the back of the existing facility. The proposed 107 spaces are all located in this area. I think it's important to note that these parking spaces are proposed to be built over 2 phases. So there's 38 parking spaces in phase 1. It basically includes these 2 parking fields here, and then 69 additional parking spaces in phase 2.
Minute left.
Okay. The church feels that the proposed parking spaces are needed not only to meet the existing congregation, but to the needs of the existing congregation, but also to meet the needs of the proposed sanctuary addition that we're proposing. We're going to be adding seats. And it's important too that there are parking spaces adjacent to the family center building. And then the last thing I just want to touch on is the sanctuary expansion. I want to get through these slides and show you what this looks like. This addition allows the church to continue to use and expand this existing sanctuary without necessitating the construction of a new facility. So we're utilizing the facility that exists today and expanding into some courtyards that are underutilized. Several studies were completed to ensure that the new expansion was feasible and that it would work with the existing structure. The expansion will provide increased seating capacity as well as enhanced access to the sanctuary through larger aisles along the sides and additional access points. The church is also proposing to upgrade many components within the existing building HVAC system as part of this project. This will greatly improve the existing building's efficiency. Many of the existing HVAC components are from our original old boilers and things. So this is a view from the stage. Looking back, you can see the expanded areas here. I'm almost done. And this is a view from the back of the one of the sanctuary expansion. You can see we're still maintaining some of the courtyard, allowing natural light. You can see the stage up here, just to give you a view of how it would look from the back. That's all we have. We're here to answer any questions you may have about the project. We look forward to receiving recommendation for site plan approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kowalski.
Hey, good evening, everybody. The petitioner did a good job of kind of summarizing up the nature of the project and the scope of it. I just really wanted to kind of touch on a couple of highlights, issues from my report. One issue that was noted in the staff report, I did want to point out the special exception use, because many of you are aware we have had special exception uses in the past for churches. This did have one already granted in the past. And the expansion does fit within the parameters of the previously issued special exception use, which is why they did not require another one at this time. Parking. I know that parking was a concern of staff, or staff did mention some to the petitioner regarding the number of parking. As you can see kind of in the report, as noted, that the parking does exceed what would be typically required for a church of that size. However, there are some kind of mitigating circumstances within that. Typically, those parking calculations were developed with the idea of allowing on-street parking, in addition, it says right in the code, use of public parking within, I believe it's 1,000 feet of the facility. And then again, obviously the on-street parking, but neither one of those options are currently available at this site. There is no on-street parking on Pauline, and there is no public parking really kind of anywhere near the site. So that was one, again, a note that we had pointed out to the petitioner regarding a concern of staff and the additional impervious surface and that. Regarding the impervious surface and the stormwater detention, that is being combined, that the detention basin that's shown on the plan does kind of currently exist in the form. They're expanding it. This is a project that's under the jurisdiction of the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner. So they're working towards, they have their preliminary approval. They need a couple more steps. And so basically these are shared detention basins with the adjacent project to the south, the Midtown apartment complex. Touching back on parking again, a major note was regarding the EV parking, the electrical vehicle parking requirements. The petitioner is requesting a variance, so what they would be required based on the amount of required spaces they have on the site, not the total amount they provide. Based on the amount of required parking would be 80 spaces. So the petitioner is requesting a variance of 70 spaces, so they would be installing 10 spaces on the site. That petition, if there is action taken tonight by the Planning Commission, it is scheduled for the Zoning Board of Appeals tomorrow night. However, if it is postponed, then obviously the Zoning Board of Appeals action would be postponed. Staff, again, did go back and forth in deliberations with this and with the petitioner. But really the feeling was that, you know, as the intent of the electrical vehicle is both for the current as well as to kind of help future-proof some of these sites, while all these spaces may not be needed at this time. However, the amount of spaces that they're installing in the proposed parking lot, 107, does exceed the amount that they would be required for, which would be 80 EV spaces. They're not touching the other parking lots. And within the proposed parking lot, they are doing the bioretention islands as required by code. Previously, some of the front parking lots, when there's a previous site plan approved, did have modifications because of the existing landscaping within those islands, and they're not modifying those at this time. But sorry, and then again, touching really quickly back on the EV parking, I mean, staff again did feel we didn't support the provision of just 10 spaces. So we do feel that they should try to provide the maximum, given that they are installing a rather large new parking lot. One other note as well that the petitioner did touch on, there is a small encroachment of parkland by the existing parking lot in the, it's kind of the northeast section, I think there. And that's existed as far back as we can look in aerial photos. And Parks and had no issue with it. Again, it's been an existing, they have worked out, they've continued over the years, allowed people to use that parking area for Hanson Park, the nature area, as well as there's a small active park in the front there. So at this time, our legal attorney's office is just working on a kind of reciprocal license agreement that continues to allow that. It's a very small encroachment, but it is something that we would want to get addressed going forward. Grace Bible has indicated they have no problems with that and are fully in favor of any agreement in that area. And again, so that concludes my presentation. Again, staff is recommending approval though, however, contingent, there is the photometric plan, which is again, something that we had pointed out later to the petitioner because the recent changes approved by City Council. So their plan, again, going forward to City Council ultimately would have to comply with those. Again, they haven't indicated that that's an issue at all. So that would be something that we would get turned in at a later time. The other condition on that, again, is either the provision of the required amount of EV parking or a variance being granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals, which again, that would be, that is on the schedule tomorrow night, depending on maybe some action here tonight. So that does conclude my presentation at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up is the public hearing. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed 1300 South Maple site plan. If you wish to address the Planning Commission on this item and you've joined us via phone, please press *9. If you have joined through the web link, you can use the raise hand feature, which is at the bottom of your screen. Or if you are watching us and want to call in now, the number is 877-853-5247 and the meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Mr. Leonard will call on select callers that have raised their hand, either calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number or the name that you've used to join via Zoom. You'll hear an automated announcement when the host is allowing you to speak. Please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. And please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. I see no one. All right, that was probably long enough, but I'll read the proposed motion, and if somebody joins, just thank you, Mr. Leonard. All right, the proposed motion is the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Grace Bible Church site plan that's at 1300 South Maple Road, subject to the following conditions. 1, submission of a revised code compliant photometric plan, and 2, submission of a revised site plan reflecting either the provision of 23 EV installed vehicle parking spaces, 23 EV ready vehicle parking spaces, and 34 EV capable spaces, or the number of EV parking spaces required if any variance is granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Could I have a commissioner move that? Moved by Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Dish. Any discussion? Or who wants to kick off the discussion? Commissioner Dish.
I just want to make sure that I am completely following the logic of the parking and the EV parking and the staff requirement. So the EV total of 80, a mix of all the usuals, is calculated based on the number of required spaces, which is not a limit, it's a minimum, which is 223. It is not calculated based on their total number of spaces, but nor is it calculated based solely on the spaces they propose to add.
That's correct. It's based on the required.
Cool. All right. So, and they want to reduce by 70, which is, I don't know what percent of 80, but it's a lot, the requirement. And the building and the parking lot are going to result in the removal of 4 landmark trees. And they're going to plant a bunch, which is nice. I'm really glad. But I am feeling a little, I like staff's recommendation that they provide the EV parking. And of course, I'm always willing to be talked out of this, but this is a lot of parking. It's a huge impervious surface. I wish, I'm sorry that a total of 4 landmark trees have to go, and that, some number of those are going because of parking. I understand the constraints on the site, so I'm understanding why this parking is necessary, but it does feel like a project that assumes the modes of transportation that we're familiar with now, which is personal transportation involving gas-powered vehicles. And so I'm squirming. I wish we could ask them to do less parking. I think if they want to do less EV, they should do less parking spaces. And if they want to do all this many parking spaces, I'd like to see all this many EV. And I already see other thoughts, so I'm going to stop talking.
Commissioner Sauvé.
How many parking spaces is required based on how many are proposed to be built for EV, if not 80? It's more than 80, right? Based on the
Wait, I'm sorry, what was the
total number of constructed parking spaces, because it's not the minimum.
Oh, right.
It's more than 80, correct?
Oh, yes, correct. If
What
it would be
is
based on their.
that? No?
Wait, did I misunderstand the question? Because I see Brett shaking his head. I thought you said.
Matt, why don't you walk through what parking is required? What's the minimum required, and what would the EV spaces of that be required based on what calculations?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's 223 spaces that are required. And so the EV parking calculation is based on that 223, not the total amount that's being provided on the site. So when you break that out, it is, I don't know, actually, if I have the breakdown of the EV, it's 15% that are EV capable, but I don't think I actually have that number broken out here. 80.
You do. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, it's
Wait,
in
yeah,
the
I
site
do.
plan.
23 EV installed.
Yeah, you got it?
23 EV installed, yes, thank you. 23 EV installed, 23 EV ready, and the 34 will be EV capable. And again, those are just based on the required amount of parking for the site, not based on what's provided.
Right. So we would be requiring 23 plus 23 plus 34 is 80, but based on the amount of parking proposed, they're actually required to do more than 80, or no
No.
EV is required for anything above required parking?
Correct. It's not required for above that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Cool. Nope, that's good. My take, like, I'm really kind of pulled with the EV stuff, especially based on certain uses. But when I actually look at the site and the sidewalk going in and the shared parking by the park and the amount of apartments going in that aren't redoing the parking areas, I'd love to see the EV parking, if it gets built, in the park parking lot, the shared park parking lot, because if we're talking about a religious use, assuming Sunday, there's a lot of the time that those EV spaces are probably underutilized that the neighborhood could figure out how to utilize. Putting them in the back of the lot doesn't feel like a welcoming space for off-site people. I know this is just like me thinking out loud. None of this is what's required. If the project gets to the point, you know, that they're expected, you're already kind of laying sidewalk and things. It's a perfect way to lay conduit right underneath it to do it, right? I think the double benefit then is how that EV parking can really service some of the apartments in the area that don't have any EV parking as an opportunity. So that's me kind of just thinking through it a little bit in terms of why I feel even better about EV, if and how others could use it. And most charging stations are charged, like they're not just like free plug and play, right? Like you still have to put in it, you know, payment information sort of thing. So those are just my comments on that. Like I'll leave it to the ZBA for any sort of variance, but I think at this table, you know, I'd say 80 is what I'd be looking for. And my other question is, can anybody tell me about this pavilion that doesn't really show up in elevation or plan? Is that just like a covered outdoor pavilion for rain for the soccer fields?
Yes, yep, correct. Sorry, I'll turn my camera on. Yes, so sorry, I should have touched on that. So it is just a open-sided covered pavilion. They use those fields. They rent those fields out to local soccer clubs. They have soccer camps there. And right now there's no structure there in case it rains or if they need shelter of some kind. So
cool. I guess, yeah, tell me a bit about, I saw it, right, like this isn't like weekly school stuff. This is mainly, you know, Sunday school or whatnot. But for like the sports activities, are they imagining they might have like little leagues and things just like for basketball and for soccer that would utilize the building more so during the week then?
yes, and I might let Reagan chime in on that. But yes, I mean, I think the goal of this family center is for outreach. There's, like you mentioned, there's a lot of communities adjacent to this site, you know, that could utilize a facility with the gymnasium. That is the intent. If Reagan, if you want to add something, feel free to. But
hi, thank you all for letting me be here. Yeah, our plan is to utilize this facility for as much of the community connection side as we can. So that primarily includes, we had the new Avalon project that just went in just to the north of us, and some of these other groups. We've been building connections with them as we've been here on the site for many years now with Pine Lake and some of those other cooperatives and stuff that are around here, in hopes that we can provide some of those opportunities. We're not providing a school or anything like that. That's not something that's a part of our future, any of that stuff. But in terms of utilizing things like the gymnasium, and I mean, we have one of the old, we found this on Facebook Marketplace basketball goals that's out there right now. And from time to time, we'll have some kids come over and use that. And that's one of the things that kind of sparked our, like, can we provide something like a gymnasium facility that's a little bit more accessible for the community in that. And the idea of the pavilion specifically, Lisa, to your point, on the soccer field was the same thing. Providing something that allows teams to gather in case of rain, or gather in terms of, you know, you're doing some sort of rotating thing where there are teams on the field and places to get out of the sun and stuff, was the idea behind that.
I guess one more question, like on that, like because like I love to see spaces utilized more, right, than like 1-2 days a week. So I am just kind of curious to know, like hours of operation for this addition. Like how do you see community members being able to engage with it?
It's a good question. For the most part, we'd be looking at outside of business hours, because that's when a lot of the church hours actually happen, right? So whether we're talking Sunday morning, which is our primary time, or post 5 o'clock, when we're able to do that type of stuff. So almost none of our church programming happens for, what's probably the 40 to 50 hour window that happens around regular business hours. And so most of that would happen below. So it'd be the idea of how can we open up this portion of the facility for folks after school? How can we open in non-peak times like summer and some of those things? Even potentially down the road, looking into what would it look like for the church to utilize the gym as a place for, providing, when there are interruptions in like school lunch programs and stuff like that, letting there be a space on the west side where we can kind of use this facility and everything that's connected to it for those type of things.
Excellent. Okay, that really helps. Warming shelters is another really good use of that gym for at least a week or two in the winter as well. No other questions right now. Thanks.
Other commissioners have questions or feedback? Commissioner Weich.
The first question's for staff, Mr. Kawasi. How much of the encroachment is into the parkland? You said a little bit, and I looked at the map and I couldn't get a sense of, like, are we talking 10 linear feet, like, or
Yeah,
is there
it's-
some?
Well, actually, Jason.
Can I share?
Van-
Yeah, can I
you may know
share
exactly.
the,
Yes. I had the number offhand, but I'd have to look at the plan if he's got the plan handy.
yeah, so I'm not sure if this is the best plan or not, but you can see, I don't know if you can see this on your screen. I don't think I can zoom in 'cause it's on PowerPoint, but this is the parking lot in question. This is the property line where my cursor is. You can see the encroachment is this piece right here. I would say it's probably 3 or 4 feet on the south side, and then as you go north, it kind of tapers back. But it kind of cuts, the driveway in half here. So maybe it's more like 4 or 5 feet. So yeah, this is the portion that we're talking about for encroachment.
So I wanted to just echo Commissioner Sauvé's comment of putting the EV parking in that area that access the park. So as you all consider or respond to whatever the zoning appeals board decides, putting it there, I think would maximize its use, especially since according to your plans, you're not planning to host a daycare center in the site. And so it sounds like it'll largely just be Sunday worship services and potential evening programming. So the site's going to sit empty, or the parking lot's going to sit empty for a majority of the work week. So that's a significant downside, especially as I looked at all of the parking. The other thing I wanted to understand, and I don't know if this is staff or the petitioner, is the Midtown condominiums haven't pulled their permits since that plan has been approved, unless they have, and I couldn't find it in the city sites. So the petitioner noted that they're going to be continuations through the property, through that development, but that development hasn't moved forward at all. So it was stated like, this is a better way to access the building because we're going to come through this development, but that development is actually not moving forward as of right now, like no permits. Well, I guess there was one permit that was approved till 2022, but no other permits, it looked like. So it didn't seem like there was any activity on the site. So I just wanted to understand how they were thinking about it. And I know they were positioning the parking lot in, I think, 3 phases, and that latter parking lot would be in that 3rd phase. And so I wasn't sure if the timing of that is what you were hoping to achieve. So I'll start with staff, and Mr. Leonard unmuted himself. And if the petitioner had anything, I'd be open to that. And then I have one more question.
I'll start. So the residential development adjacent has not started construction activity, as you accurately reflected. They are in the process actually of amending their site plan right now through an administrative amendment process. They're making some slight modifications to the grading and they're proposing some phasing lines. I think part of that probably might be to reflect the order of construction in that regard. That aside, they would have the ability, if, for example, if this project were to move forward, they would have the ability to construct that driveway. If this site plan relied upon that driveway, it would in fact have to occur. And that's like in the circumstance where the driveway gets built sort of, I guess, adjacent to or as component to the Grace Bible Church development as opposed to the apartments. That ultimate consequence would likely fall on the residential property adjacent, where if that driveway was constructed in the manner on that site plan for the shared benefit of this site could proceed. But then if they didn't proceed with the development of that adjacent residential, it is possible then that could expire and they might have to go through the site plan review process again. We measure sort of progress by a couple measures. You have to start within a certain time frame. You can extend that through the administrative process, and you have to make steady progress towards completion. So those are my initial thoughts. I know that they are actively working. We are actually, I just checked the status of that administrative review, and some final engineering comments are due, I think, later this week. So that's, again, it doesn't necessarily translate to instant permits being pulled, but they seem to be submitting documents towards that.
If I could add just to that, I agree with everything Brett said. I mean, they have cleared the site. There were 2 houses on the property. They demolished those. All their solar erosion control is in place. They've closed on that property, so they own it outright. So all of our communications with them is that they're proceeding forward, and they're quite a bit ahead of us. So even though they're going through an administrative amendment, we still have we have a city council meeting to go through and everything. So we don't anticipate starting this project. At this point, it's probably looking like the spring. So I feel like they're going to be far enough ahead of us that, and we've been coordinating with them all along the way. Obviously, we have a shared base and shared easement agreements and all those things. So we have a good relationship with them, and we're confident they're going to move forward.
As I was looking at the site plan, there was a note under the site summary that looked at the traffic, and I wondered how the petitioner arrived at the 0.69 trips per occupied seat calculation, which I think is a huge part of the articulation for the need for the parking. So you're only proposing 420 seats in the sanctuary, even with the addition, unless I misunderstood. And so I'm just trying to ascertain the sort of that calculus for the parking, especially since we're seeing such a significant amount of parking on the site. I know you're still within the zoning, so there's no, I think, UDC concerns, but I just wanted to understand how the petitioner arrived at that, or if that's a staff provided calculus to help them stay within the UDC.
So I may need Reagan to join in on this question, but we did hire a traffic consultant. Fleece Van den Brink did the traffic study. They did actual traffic counts during Sunday mornings to see how many actual cars came in and out of the site. To your point of how they exactly calculated how many cars per seat, I do not know. I believe the existing sanctuary has 400 seats, and then we're adding an additional, Reagan, help me out if you can, but I don't have it in front of me, but yeah.
Yeah, the current sanctuary facility has approximately 400 seats, and the pews make it a little bit different than actual chairs to calculate kind of the number of people who can fit there, particularly in a COVID world. But the expansion of that little bit over 3,000 square feet that goes either way is a total of about 200 usable seats in addition to that. So I think that total number is somewhere in the ballpark of 600 is what would happen after those numbers aren't exactly dead on, but we're kind of, for our calculations, we're looking at about a 50% increase in terms of our existing facility, if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Mr. Lerner has his hand up. I don't know if he should talk before I ask my next question.
I was just gonna, I'll see if I can find it, but typically, I can't speak for them, and I'll see if it's reflected in any of the technical reviews. But typically, the trip generation comes from the Institute of Traffic Safety Engineers, ITS, and it's a nationally adopted, basically kind of guide to trip generation that we typically impose and require our submitters to abide by. And that trip generation is based on building use type. And so you put in what the building is used for, and it generates sort of a rate of trip generation. But I would anticipate that that's where that number came from, because that's typically how it's done. But I'll see if I can clarify that through the review while you're deliberating.
Thanks. Again, this is a question for city or for staff or for the petitioner. During the public collection period where they met with the neighbors, a neighbor indicated concerns about the sidewalk, and I want to ensure that that had been remediated, and if it wasn't, if it was planning to be with the site. I do bike along that sidewalk a number of times, and there are some, so I know the city is involved in getting everybody to fix their sidewalks and all of that. So there's like a collision of all those things. But I think the neighbors were mostly concerned about water runoff because there's a hill that comes all the way down to Pauline. And then without there being good drainage at that point, there can be freezing if it's raining. It can also cause other things. And even as my kids and I have biked along that corridor, you get a lot of speed. And then if you come into that sort of space and there's gravel or things like that, one can wipe out. So I heard the petitioner talk about how they were going to bring the public sidewalk into the property to access it. I heard the petitioner talk about going up the driveway to access the light, but I didn't hear how the sidewalk that is running along, I think it's the south side of the property. I'm really bad ordinarily when I'm not looking at the map. And so if someone could just address the sidewalk, and then that's all I have for now, but I might have another question in a minute.
Yes, that's a good question. So as part of the Midtown project improvements, they are basically reconstructing or constructing a new driveway approach at the intersection of Pauline. So I think that's the area that's usually the biggest issue, because it's kind of at the low point in the hill. So water would sit between, would get stuck, kind of between the grass area between the curb and the sidewalk. But that is all getting rebuilt as part of their project. So I think that will fix most of the problems. There still is some, grass area from the Grace Bible Church site that slopes to the east towards South Maple, because the church sits up on a hill. So, I think that's something we just got to keep on top of. I don't know that we can fix all the grading, if you will. I think fixing the drainage at the bottom where it all collected before is a big improvement. But yeah, I mean, I understand the concern. And I don't know if there's a way to fix all of it along our whole frontage, but we are fixing it at the bottom where the water would collect before.
Yeah, and if I could just add briefly to that, not much, but I did, in walking the site when I went to the post and stuff, I think in reflecting that comment, it did see the majority of that issue where you could see like dirt on the side, or you could see there's a little bit of water. It is, well, I mean, technically it's just off the site now because that's the Midtown site, but it's right at that intersection. But that is where, and right now there's, again, like previously it was, even though it's vegetated and things, there was a lot of sheet flow off there, up run off of the hill. So when that's constructed, that will definitely be fixed because they're not allowed to shed off there. What we did do, as well as refer, I just had our soil erosion guy just referred. So when he's out there, he was gonna and actually I'll follow up with him because he said he did go out there again to inspect that to make sure that there wasn't any like excessive runoff in that location or anything else like that. So most of that issue, walking the other sidewalk in front of Grace Bible itself, it seemed okay. But again, I was on a nice day. It wasn't raining and there was no snow, obviously. So, but I think that may address part of your questions.
Okay, I remember my last question. Is it okay for me to ask now? Okay, so in phase 3, that's the last parking lot that you are adding. And this may be a question for staff. Is there a way for us to do parking in that phase 3 on, because that's grass now, so they would be clearing that space and then putting in an asphalt parking lot. Is there a way to put in a grass parking lot?
No, code doesn't allow, code requires it to be paved. It doesn't even allow a gravel surface in that.
That was my question. Thank you.
Mr. Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you. I was wrong. So let me explain how the trip generation was generated. They calculated, they actually measured trip generation based on the use of the church. It was done during COVID. So even though the current church, I'm quoting from the traffic impact study right now, the church currently has 400 seats, but only 168 seats were occupied during the peak period. Therefore, what they did is they measured the ingress and egress of all the trips from multiple service times and figured out the total trips based on the number of seats and occupants. So when aggregating all of those ingress and egress trips over 3 services, they generated that 0.69 trips per seat. And so they use that then, that actual data as a factor projecting forward across the expansion of the sanctuary. So it was not strictly, as I mentioned, a ratio from the manual. They actually used actual data utilization of their trips on site and then projected that same rate to the expanded capacity.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Thank you. Okay, I want to make sure that I understand this shared driveway that kind of butts up to Pauline. So if that Midtown in theory, who's building this new complex, is building that road, right? So the 2 driveways are going to feed into that road and Midtown is building it? Yes. So if something were to happen in Midtown, didn't build it, this is what I don't know that I understood based on what you were saying, Mr. Leonard, or maybe it was Mr. Kowalski. Is Midtown still on the hook to build that connection if something were to just like go disastrously wrong with that project? Or would we just be left with driveways to nowhere?
So if Midtown were to construct, I want to make sure I understand your question. Midtown could only construct that driveway because they have some arrangement with Grace Bible Church for that access. If they did that, they could construct that portion, basically terminate it, and they could stop. And then that would meet the requirements if presuming the Grace Bible Church plan goes through the approval process and is approved based on reliance upon that drive. Alternatively, Grace Bible, if for some reason Midtown wasn't moving forward at the same pace, through agreement, Grace Bible Church then could elect to construct that drive to finish their development. To be clear though, if we're approving a site plan that relies upon that, one of those 2 things will have to happen. That would not have the impact of necessitating that Midtown absolutely move forward with their development. But as you heard from all of my observations and Mr. Van Ryn, we anticipate that will happen. So, the short of it is that driveway is anticipated to be constructed as part of the residential We anticipate that that's going to happen in a time frame which could be used to the benefit of these connections for Grace Bible. If for some reason that didn't happen, that would still be required if for some reason the Grace Bible moved forward. We wouldn't allow occupancy of that strictly with the promise that that happens at some time in the future. As that is part of the access to the site, it would have to be realized prior to the completion of the Grace Bible site. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. So somebody has to build this.
Yeah.
Okay, that does help. I think that this might be a question for Mr. Sims. I'm just curious, before COVID, what was your occupancy like? I'm just trying, I guess I'll say why I'm asking this question. This is a lot of parking that's being put in. And I understand that you've probably done your due diligence. It's just hard for me to imagine that all of these spots are going to be filled. So I guess I just want to hear a little bit about your congregation, your occupancy, your projections for filling these 200 pews once people feel more comfortable post-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of it was already delineated in terms of kind of how much of our parking has to happen specifically on our site because of not having access to some of those public parking type situations and those things. So that stuff was already kind of mentioned. The main reason is that, and some of it is connected to the way in which we're building this project. This church has been on this site for, as was mentioned, for a while. But we've never had pedestrian access directly to the church, and which is something we're trying to fix as a part of this because that speaks volumes to a community, I think, honestly, if we can be honest about making sure that there's a doorway regardless of how someone chooses to come, right? But I think some of that is reflected by the population of our church for the most part, which is we are primarily a commuter church in those sense. So we have as far as Milan and Chelsea and some of those things, as well as primarily Saline, kind of the downtown Ann Arbor student body area, Dexter and Saline and kind of those parts as well. So as a result, we have a lot of young families. So to give you an idea kind of where we are in terms of the population, we were utilizing our facility for 3 services, which was mentioned in the traffic study, and those things were there. We were filling 2 of those services to capacity prior to COVID. We're running, again, because of COVID distancing and some of those things in order to, our numbers look very different at the moment. But what was largely included was that on a given Sunday, somewhere between 10 and 20% of those were underneath 5th grade. So a lot of families, a lot of young families. So if you're saying we have a 400 person, give or take, auditorium, right? And we're having somewhere around 800 to 1,000 total people on a full Sunday pre-COVID, we're looking at somewhere between 100 and 200 of those, maybe even more, depending on the week, being 5th grade and down. So one of the reasons why the parking has been so necessitated, as well as the expansion of the family center specifically, is because all of our kids ministry spaces pre-COVID were being overutilized. We've estimated somewhere between 10 and 30% based on the capacities of those rooms. So all that is to say, we needed this outlet and in this larger space. So parking, a lot of commuting. I don't know if that commuter kind of conversation answers what you were looking for. But yeah, that's the main reason why this was there. We've been utilizing even permeable space and stuff like that on our site to try to get all the cars here. And that, that's even with some we have a pretty substantial carpool system that we try to utilize to bring students in from the university. And even with those things, it's the battle of, volunteers are here and taking spaces for all 3 services and some of those type of things. Again, I don't know if that kind of gives you a clearer picture there. But.
No, it does. Thank you. So you've been parking off of the normal parking lot just to meet the needs of the people coming to your services.
That's correct. And in places like, I don't have the space in front of me, but this is like asking people who have trucks to pull into situations like that where they could get out, which is not a great situation when it comes to the joys. I'm a Florida boy originally, and so the joys of the snow world is still very new to me. And yeah, that's not exactly something that helps us a lot when our lovely winters come around here in Ann Arbor.
Okay, my last question, and maybe this is just also sort of thinking out loud, since you're doing the parking and phasing, well, I guess here's the real question. And maybe this is a staff or a Mr. Vandering question. Do we have to clear, like for that whole new parking lot, does the whole entire site need to be cleared, even though the parking is being built in 2 phases? Does it need to initially all be, and I don't know exactly what's where?
Yeah, I can answer that. So unfortunately, a lot of the storm sewer that is going to be servicing the proposed building, and this parking is located between our proposed building and the stormwater detention system, and a lot of the storm pipe and utilities crosses through this area to make sure that we can pick up that runoff and direct it there. So it would be difficult to preserve. I mean, I think there may be some things we can do, but it would be difficult to preserve that entire area until we got to that phase.
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking, like, again, like, who knows when COVID's gonna end? Like, who knows? Like, it's hard to know if people are going to be doing things in the same manner that they did things 2 years ago. So I'm just sort of thinking, like, if the parking's going to be built in phases anyway, like, is there an opportunity to sort of hold that as pristine as it can be given the other constraints, and like make a decision, whenever before phase 3, if like the parking is really needed? And the decision here, I don't necessarily think is predicated on that answer. It's just something that I was thinking of, like maybe this 3rd phase of parking, although I think it does like include that driveway. It's just sort of like a
yeah. So
in.
that's, I mean, I agree with you. So we it's one of our responses to planning review with Matt. He asked that question too, and I think the church responded that, say we build the family center in the phase 1 parking, I mean, they're certainly going to evaluate where they're at with parking before they go and have to spend the money to build the additional 68 spaces, I think, that are in phase 3. So they're definitely going to look at that. They've been looking at the parking in this site since 2015. I think they count it every Sunday. They would count it to keep track of, like, oh, we only have 1 spot left. They don't want to build any more parking than they need, but this is based on all that data they have. This is what they came up with as far as this is, what this would make it work. So I think they're willing to evaluate it after the family center gets constructed and the phase 1 parking is done. And if it's not necessary, I think they're willing to, if we would need to go through an amendment or whatever, to not have to build that future parking. I think that's something they would be willing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I think that is it for now, except I guess to say that this is really making me think about parking maximums and wanting to have that discussion again at some point. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Clark.
I have a question for my own reference. Does the city have any requirements about features to mitigate for heat island effects? I just noticed that with the new apartments that are being built on that side of the road, just with quick math, bare minimum space, unless I'm way off base here, would be about, so if the apartments next door with about 100 parking spaces constructed this year is about 18,000 square feet of new impermeable surface. Plus this one, and again, this is not even counting for like lanes or anything, I just assumed bottom line. And then, yeah, so something like 24,000 square feet of new impermeable surface on that stretch of road. So I just wanted to kind of think about, and again, my math is really quick, so don't, that was just kind of quick and dirty estimate. I just wanted to kind of think about if there are, or if that's something we can kind of put on our to-do list in the future one day, or wish list, I guess, would be heat island mitigation features.
No, I mean, we don't have any direct programs that would counteract the heat island effect. I mean, I know that part of the idea when we revised the landscaping code years ago was to decrease the number of spaces without a landscape island, the bioretention, those were part of the thinking behind that. but Mr. Leonard may have a little bit more of sustainability is thinking of any of those, but I'm not aware of any other mitigation factors we have for heat island effects right now.
I would agree. You won't find anything in the code that specifically addresses it, but I think that part of our natural features identification and mitigation goes towards that, as Matt indicated. Specifically, I think our parking areas where we now require vegetation and landscape areas at a certain ratio of impervious surface. And of course, whenever we have the opportunity for sites like this to move them from non-existent or inadequate to more functional stormwater, I think that can help with that. I think it's related to heat island, but it's not directly. It's sort of an effect probably that we're managing a little bit more. But the short is no, you won't find a heat island section of the code. But I do think that some of our regulations tend to help address it and try to mitigate it.
Commissioner Gibrandel.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Commissioner Clark, because it's something that I think that we don't address any of that in our code in terms of how things are oriented. It's only about like what fills the void that's left in terms of the islands. And I think that's one of those like small nuance things that we might be able to shift in the code that we actually have control over, where we might think about, instead of just having this even distribution and letting the petitioner kind of put them where they want by code, but also just where they want to, because they have mitigation, all that kind of thing. It's really thinking about south side and west side and really thinking about those things more carefully, I think is a real opportunity that we potentially have to be able to chip away at some of these things. So obviously not for this project, but I think that that's an opportunity that we have to really try to do something about that. And I guess I would just encourage the petitioner through their mitigation. I don't see anything on the west side over here in terms of, I see quite a bit on the south, and I think some of that is the mitigation trees that you have as well. But it's an opportunity, I think, to be able to put some things on the west side to be able to deal with some of that hot sun. And frankly, like people just like to park where there's shade too. We all kind of crave that. So again, it may not be for this round, but I think that that's something that would be a good thing for us to think about for our future, that, isn't a huge kind of, knock the energy down by huge amounts or things like that, but it's like every little bit helps. And I think it would be great for us to start thinking about how, sun plays on these dark surfaces that we have and the impact that has on our city. So I would hope that we can maybe tackle that one at some point within some of our ordinances, to be able to think about fine tuning some of that, to be able to make it more sensitive to shading on pavement. So I'm glad you brought that up. I would just say in terms of the project, things seem good to me. But I don't support reducing the amount of electric vehicle. I just don't see a reason to. And I think it's where things are going, and I think we all need to do our part. So I don't support that part of the variance, but it seems like things are well thought out in other ways, and I support the project in general.
All right. Any others? All right, so I agree with everything that you all said. I'm curious about how the number of EV spots at 10, how the petitioner arrived at that.
Yeah, I can answer that. We provided this as a part of kind of our ZBA application for that meeting as well. Essentially, we were kind of following in the footprint of some of the earlier variances that were granted on this project, specifically the St. Francis project, which is a similar project in the sense of being with a nonprofit and in similar type of use for the facility. So that's kind of how we arrived at that calculus. As I understand their calculus, it was kind of based on less the number of overall parking spots that are code required, but more the number of used parking spots, because this type of lot is a kind of like a high capacity but low usage rate lot because of the way in which we utilize it on Sunday morning, primarily in terms of being full. And then for the rest of the week, it's much smaller. So our number was based off the number of employees that the church has. So that's how we arrived at that 10 number down from the 80 number. Was trying to follow kind of in the footsteps of some of those variances. St. Francis went through several rounds in that process with the ZBA, and so we wanted to make sure that we could at least start the process from another perspective, right, and kind of be a little further down the road by proposing kind of what we saw as in line with our facility is connected to theirs. So that's where we came to that number. Was the idea of when we look at how many spots are being utilized, when we disperse how our lot is used over the course of an entire week versus just kind of that high water mark of the Sunday morning. That's kind of where we came to that number.
Okay. And this is a question for staff, which is, this to me strikes me as a chicken and egg problem. Like ZBA can't vote on this until we send them something, but I don't feel like, in my mind, at the very minimum, the multipliers that are in the code, which is 10% being ready, 10% being installed, and 15% being capable, those would apply to what is being built. And so I arrive at 38 spots minimum, and that would still require a variance, but I can't fathom this having fewer than 38 spots. So I feel uncomfortable voting on a site plan that doesn't show 38 spots. But even if it does show 38 spots, my understanding is that the variance, how does that work? Like they can't vote on the variance without that. So
yeah, so I recognize that, and so what Matt and I tried to do is to provide you with the language that would we wanted to present language that would recognize that there is a decision relative to this development that is out of your hands. The Zoning Board of Appeals is an independent body. They are going to apply their standards, and they're going to come to a decision to either grant the variance or not. I would, I can't speak for the Zoning Board of Appeals. I would just point out that I think that this petition is quite different than the previous one that was referenced. The distinctions between the two projects are a project that was that the proposed improvements to the other church was an addition that necessitated no change to the parking lot. This is coming with, as we've noted, a pretty substantial new and expansion of the parking lot. I think the intention of the ordinance is just that. When parking is going in, what is the opportunity to future-proof this to the changing trends in transportation? I guess I would push back a little bit on your concerns. If you're not comfortable, it's certainly your prerogative if you feel like you need more information. But the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals is going to be impactful one way or another. If no variance is granted, then the site plan is going to have to reflect the required spaces of 80. If a variance is granted and the site plan is revised to meet that, it is going to meet the standards of the code in the same. So at that point, if for some reason the Zoning Board of Appeals granted that variance and you were not comfortable until you knew that, I would just point out that at that point, the standard is not going to be 80. It's going to be whatever the variance was granted for those number of spaces. So that's why we proposed the motion as it is. And I guess I'm happy to answer any other questions.
So channeling, I mean, what I want to say is, we have you staff are our link with the ZBA. I'm pointing out again, like that when there's an opening, somebody ought to volunteer.
And I would just share that, just one more point to that. We've shared the same sort of analysis that we shared with the Planning Commission and the staff report in the Zoning Board of Appeals staff report as well. So we are being consistent in our communication sort of with our staff observations, but just like you are applying your standards, the Zoning Board of Appeals are going to apply their standards for decision one way or another.
Okay. I mean, so the language that you have here is certainly stronger. You know, suggests going all the way up to the 80 that the code would require. I guess where I sit, and for what it's worth, if there's any ZBA members listening, like having that multiplier, at least to anything that's new, is really, really important to me. Like, I just don't, I cannot fathom putting in new parking where you don't at least have that. And the last time that we were in a similar situation where EV parking came into play, and our discussion was at that site plan that we saw was at least having those multipliers applied to the new stuff. And so that's where I'm uncomfortable, like, especially building parking that may only be used, you know, according to the rationale, that will only be used for a small portion of the week. To, if you're like, part of the reason that we have this in here is to make sure that any of the parking, any new parking that we have here is future proofed. And so this makes me really uncomfortable. So actually, I will say that I don't plan to support this unless it can show, in my mind, at least those 38 chargers, because or 38 spots that at minimum, like, I could vote in favor of this if it had at least that, knowing that ZBA could decide somewhere between 38 and 80, but I can't support it with only 10. So, Commissioner Gibrandel, your hand was still up, but I think I never saw it go down. Okay, so Commissioner Weich.
This is for staff. Are we able to send a memo to the ZBA with the concerns that the chair has just articulated? I thought there was a way for us to communicate, or do we do that in the actual motion where we revise the motion to fit what we are hoping to achieve?
You could send a communication. I would, if that was a desire, it would be something that the commission should take action on, because it needs to reflect the commission as a body. I guess I would just, I would just frame it as, the Zoning Board of Appeals, I think, carefully does apply the standards just like you do. And so I would just sort of keep in the back of your mind the kind of communication that you think would be helpful from the Zoning Board of Appeals to a decision that you're making as to how you'd want to share with them. But yes, you could do that.
Because it feels like, even by the petitioner's articulation, is they granted this exception, we're hoping they'll grant our exception as well. And so now there's kind of this issue around, like, is a precedent being set? So if you come in with this kind of site plan, you could expect that this is going to happen, and then that undermines the very goal of these initiatives. So short of asking the zoning board, the Zoning Board of Appeals to do what we want, we do want to signal we don't want a precedent set where these kinds of sites that come through are shifting. So trying to be respectful to the point that you just made. And then my other comment was back to the petitioner. I didn't note it in any of the elevation or any of the site plan that I reviewed that you are considering solar. And I just wondered why you're not, especially with all of this new construction, considering any alternative energy sources, either geothermal or solar.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are considering, we actually have some bid processes we're working through right now with Harvest Solar and some of the other companies that are connected to this. We have a connection through one of our elders who's connected to that company directly. So we're looking at that, but some of it because of the resources that are required on the front side, which is true for both the EV standard and the solar side. Some of those things are contingent kind of what are we going to be able to do in terms of the overall finances to do that. But we're absolutely in the process of looking into solar and some of those things. In fact, I have an email in my inbox from one of their reps over there who is asking for some of the same plans you guys received to look at kind of what square footage will be available when we take into account rooftop units and all those type of things as a part of the facility that's being proposed, and how we can kind of utilize those things. So yeah, we are looking into that at the moment because we are open to this alternate energy conversation.
One of the things I guess that sometimes happens is that I've made known kind of where, how I plan to vote. I wonder if the petitioner has any interest in showing 38 spots on here or committing to 38 spots. Otherwise, yeah, let me just leave it there.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll actually jump in at this point. So the plans that you actually have before you right now actually meet all of the current EV standards as displayed. We actually have, I believe it is 23 EV charger stations that charge 2 spaces apiece. So the plans before you actually do meet the requirements.
Can staff clarify then how, where, like, what the notation is or how that works with the second condition then? If they are shown, which I didn't zoom in, I guess, well enough.
Yeah, it would be, then the plan would be modified, I guess, accordingly based on ZBA action. And that wouldn't be something that would necessitate another planning commission review. Is if approved tonight with that showing on there, then whatever the ZBA grants, that's what the plan would essentially need to reflect, whether it's going forward with all the compliance spaces or if the variance is granted, whatever that variance may be, the plans can be amended to fix that.
Because of where there was some discussion about where the preferred location for some of those chargers is, and because I don't have want to dig through it right now, could the petitioner share that site plan showing those locations?
Sure, I can share.
I'll do it, Brandon.
You'll do it, Jason? Okay.
And Commissioner Dish, I see your hand.
All right.
Jason, actually, if you can go to C206.
I don't have all the plans, Brandon. Or maybe I do have that sheet though.
It's on C206 and they're in just the new parking lot.
They're in this location, right?
Yep, with the exception of one to the north of your cursor for one ADA accessible EV charging space.
Yeah, right here. So there's one here and there are 22 here. So for a total of 23.
Yep.
Okay. Correct. So what's required though, is 23 installed,
which we show.
23 ready, and 34 capable. So are those ready and capable also shown?
So the code defines for both ready and capable as actually a panel requirement for internal electrical. So that we note that those would be capable and be ready, but those aren't denoted as specific spaces. That would be a flexible positioning for when we were to install any additional spaces. We haven't designated the specific spaces at this time.
Got it. I think capable and ready, particularly when it's a surface parking lot, it includes the underground, it's the raceway as well. So yeah, I think that there is, it's not just the panel.
Yeah, I can clarify that. The EV installed is installed charging units. EV ready has the raceway with the installed conductor lines, and then EV capable has the raceway and capacity in the panel.
So again, I mean, I appreciate having the 23 here and shown, and based on the conversation from colleagues earlier, like this is future-proofing what you're built or partially future-proofing what you're building, but it doesn't get to that number that's currently in there. And so, so what I'm hearing too is that some additional things would need to happen, be shown on the plans in order. That's why that that second thing, it wasn't that second condition is on there. Okay, go ahead. Actually, if the petitioner wants to go, and then Commissioner Dish.
Yeah, so you can't, I mean, we're showing the 23 that have to be installed. The other 23 and 34, I believe, are listed on the cover sheet as being proposed. I mean, but those improvements, like the raceways and the conduits and the upgraded panel, I mean, those things aren't going to be developed until we do detailed design plans. I mean, there's really no way to show that on a site plan other than to denote it on the cover sheet, which is what we're doing. So I feel like the plan, the original intent of the plan was to meet the ordinance. The intent of our meeting tomorrow at the ZBA is to request for a variance. If we don't get the variance, then we're going back. We're going to meet the intent of the ordinance.
Okay. Commissioner Dish.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if this is a question, but I did just want to follow up on Commissioner Sauvé's suggestion, because I know that you have a proposed sidewalk connection along the parking lot that you share with the nature area, but that's not going to be a new parking lot. And so in order to, I don't know, can EV capable be installed without ripping up that existing parking lot, since there's going to be a proposed sidewalk extension? Or is that, yeah, Lisa, you suggested it, so you can answer it.
I'll just, like, you can run the conduit under the sidewalk. At some point, there's going to be some interaction with it that would require more invasive construction. But like along the sidewalk, there then becomes a landscape area that I think would be ideal on the south side of that parking lot to plug them in, you know, as a possibility. Getting to the north side means you have to kind of like wrap around that parking lot to have all those stubs up. But again, this is me thinking out loud and kind of it's not something that I'm like very fixed to. But again, when we think about Sunday versus the rest of the week and who could, you know, use these, and that the community knows that these are kind of community parking spaces instead of church parking spaces, I think that says a lot to who could utilize these more often, get a bang for your buck in terms of putting them into.
No, I am 100% in favor of that suggestion. And I wasn't sure about the feasibility because, of course, your day job is so different than mine. But I am all for this infrastructure, which is expensive, being, you know, as shareable as it possibly can be.
Any other comments? I'm still of the mind that like it seems like there's not I'm not comfortable with kind of where the plan is in terms of moving forward, not fully like having those details shown here. So I'm not comfortable supporting this. Commissioner Weich.
I just wanted to ask staff, is the petitioner correct that we wouldn't show on these plans the EV ready and the EV capable and any notation on the plan? It's only in the cover letter.
Well, it's on the cover of the plan as a petitioner, so it's required. And I would say that we have approved other plans that have noted the realization of the number of ready and capable spaces, but not located them on the plan. I do think location of the charging installed is probably the most critical, but if that is pertinent information to the commission, that's something that can be asked.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, Mr. Leonard, I think we can vote.
One
Commissioner
quick thing,
White
I
voted,
thought,
snuck in before, before we
well,
started.
just in terms of what Mr. Leonard said around if we wanted to make a communication to the ZBA, we had to take official action. So I didn't know if that needed to precede the action on the site plan. So if we could get
whatever
some
order.
clarity on that.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so we can either approve or reject this, and well, I guess if we rejected it, we wouldn't need to send the note to ZBA because that would force the petitioner to do revisions of some sort. Okay, all right. I just wanted to understand the order of things.
And one of the communications, people have been like kind of brainstorming out loud today, so I'm going to brainstorm out loud too, or think out loud. Would it be appropriate, Mr. Leonard, to, in that condition, to say in the second condition, or the number of EV parking spaces required by any, if any variance is granted by the zoning board of appeals, so long as that number exceeds 38 spaces? Like that's what in my mind, that's the minimum.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want to communicate to them, is that like, but I again don't want to kind of second guess their thing. Would that be an appropriate thing, or should it be a separate communication?
I think it should be a separate communication because it suggests that you have the authority to somehow narrow the scope of a variance that could or couldn't be granted for a project, and it's simply not within the Planning Commission's purview. That is the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay.
So I don't think it would be appropriate to include in the motion.
Okay.
But if you feel that you want that information of that decision prior, you could wait until that action occurs. But again, at that point, I think that the result has happened. It's either been granted or not. And if any variance is granted, then a plan would be presented back to you, I presume, compliant with that.
Got it. Commissioner Gabrandel.
So basically, if we vote for this, then we're essentially saying that it's the lower number. Is that what I'm like? Do we have no? Like if we
what we've attempted to do with your motion is to communicate that this site plan has to include all of the required EV parking, and it is noted on the plan. Unless a variance is granted, then
okay,
it has to reflect that.
Okay.
Just to be like, like in an extreme example, you could approve a site plan. A petitioner, without any sort of premeditation, could then subsequently seek a variance on that, and then that could proceed to City Council, altered from what you did, but still fully compliant with ordinance because of the granting of that variance. So, I think that the communication is the most appropriate. But again, I would suggest that you would consider, to some extent, it's, their process, they're a board trying to apply the same standards that you are. And so I don't know what the outcome is, but again, as I've indicated, I think this is a pretty different circumstance than the prior one.
Okay, and that's actually helpful for me. So to be clear, they could have not told us. You could have not brought this information that they were going to seek a variance to us.
And in fact, the plan that you see sort of reflects that in a way.
Yes. That changes my mind on this, other than to say that I will let my kids stay up way past their bedtime so that we can vote on that communication, because I think that that's really important. Commissioner White.
So the thing that is confusing, Mr. Leonard, in what you're saying is once it gets to council for final approval, the notation to council shows the vote of Planning Commission without the discussion that we've had. So when they receive it, with the exception of Councilmember Dish being there to speak, but she's actually not permitted, I don't think, to speak on behalf of the commission unless elected to do so by our bylaws, from what I understood. So it's absent of this, hour and 42-minute conversation. And if we pass it unanimously, then it appears as if we didn't actually have this conversation around this sort of piece. And so I'm just trying to understand how that gets communicated in the best possible way, so that council isn't just seeing this and saying, okay, we're, planning commission voted unanimously to accept this. Who are we to change anything? They've already had a robust conversation. And we're like, but wait, we wanted to make these changes, but we couldn't because there's a board in the way and we can't tell you what to do because you're independent too. And council has said they do not watch planning commission. So they are not aware, by their own admission, not Commissioner Dish, of course, because she's here. And so anyway, I'm just, again, saying this out loud to try to help move us along so that we can get to the thing that I think we want to do, which is to communicate that this is different because this is a newly constructed parking lot versus just a site changing the existing footprint. And we don't want to make it onerous on them just because they're changing the existing footprint. We want to say, this is a 100-year development. It's a special use to start with. It's a church. It's either going to be a church, a daycare center, or a school, or it's going to get torn down and rebuilt. And so we want to try to put some of this infrastructure in place when we have opportunity. And that's it. So
I'm going to start with something that's going to be very frustrating, I'm sure, to all of you, is that discussion doesn't matter. Communicating that to the city council doesn't really matter a whole lot, because your task here is to determine if this site plan meets the ordinance of the city. The city council has the same job, is to determine if this site plan meets the ordinance of the city. Neither group has the ability to add requirements that aren't housed in that. And the Zoning Board of Appeals process is part of that process. And so that's why I think a communication is appropriate. You can share that, but the process that you apply as to whether the site meets the UDC requirements, and the process the Zoning Board of Appeals applies to determine whether or not a variance is or isn't appropriate, lay out the rules by which this will be measured against. And so I would say that probably the more important thing to communicate to council would be, if by ordinance action, if this ordinance isn't doing what you want it to, then we should change it. So I don't mean to belittle. I know that I think you're wrestling with the issue, but you're wrestling with those constraints. It's sort of similar, I think, to what we discussed a little bit in our working session. Our goals are broad. Our task is more focused on the ordinance. Sorry, that was a real downer, apparently.
Commissioner Sylvain.
Don't worry, I'll be more of a downer. Like, I would not support a communication. I don't want to set precedent that we're issuing communications with every vote. And this doesn't seem like very far off of every other decision we make and the bodies that it might move through for approval. So I would not support it at all.
Well, then I kind of want to have that discussion about communications now. Commissioner Gibrandel.
So when I look at the cover sheet though, Nick, I'm sorry for belaboring all of this, I see like the number of spaces that we want on the cover sheet in the chart. So what do we do with that if we're voting on this plan set and not whether or not they're going for a variance?
Given the staff report, like that's different than what's in the table in the staff report.
Right.
Yeah.
You could, So first of all, my apologies. In my conversation, my review of this, I wasn't aware that the site plan included. I was under the impression that the site plan reflected the proposed 10 spaces. So my apologies for that. But what that means is I think the motion is fine as it is. It identifies a condition that you have to comply with the full amount. I think frankly, adding the condition is a bit of a statement unto itself that, you know, the expectation is to meet all of the spaces, but you could strike those conditions, that condition, and simply omit it. What that would mean is you'd be approving a site plan that is fully compliant, and they could proceed to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They could be denied, and then the site plan would go forward to City Council in its current form. They could go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and they could be granted, and the site plan could be modified to reflect 10 EV spaces as an example. And then that would proceed to City Council fully compliant with this.
So the fact that they show it on the plan set means that they're compliant. It's just the variance is okay.
I think maybe, and my apologies, maybe we made this worse, but Matt and I spent a fair amount of time trying to sort of present what our consideration was with this. I felt like the last project that we considered, particularly Mill Creek Townhomes, this seemed to be a big topic about what is the right, wrong, appropriate way when we're expanding parking areas, and that project is seeking a variance as well. So I think all three of them are actually pretty different circumstances, but our intention was just to be forthright with the commission that they are seeking this. Staff's perspective is that they can provide them to meet the intention of the ordinance. And that's why we included the condition.
Yeah, and I would just say that just as a message to future petitioners, that if your intent is to ask for the variance, then show it in the plans, because it's just confusing the issue to have it be kind of, it's like trying to do it both ways, which seems disingenuous to me. Just commit one way or the other. If you believe you're going to get it and go for it, then go for it. And if you're not, then that's the risk you take, you know. And so I think that's part of what is making this kind of more muddy and confusing.
And that's probably as much us as the petitioner, you know, us trying to figure out the best way to communicate when this arises. So we can follow that direction if that seems to resonate with the commission.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Can the ZBA say, no, we don't accept, no, we don't accept the 10, like we're denying that variance, but we would, like kind of the discussion we've had right now, like, but we will do it for these 107 new spaces and you have to do 38. Is it not like an all or nothing thing with the ZBA, or is there a discussion point, do you know, that they could like deliberate and come up with a different number? And then would that come back to us or not? No, I guess it wouldn't.
Yeah, it's a little less deliberation than planning commission, I would say, but yes, a petitioner could modify their application based on feedback they received from the Zoning Board of Appeals. I would also say that a parking variance is a little bit different set of standards than a typical variance. It's less robust than the typical variance standards. So that can happen. You know, sometimes a petitioner will sort of frankly read the room and sense that they're a bit maybe far afield of what the Zoning Board of Appeals thinks is appropriate, and they might modify their proposal. So it does happen, but I would say the vast majority of actions before the Zoning Board of Appeals tend to be an up or down vote at that meeting.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions before we vote? Okay, Mr. Leonard.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Yes.
Commissioner Dish.
Yes.
Commissioner Lee.
We didn't hear that.
Oh, yes.
Now we did.
Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Gibrando.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, we are on to item 10, public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about any item of interest. If you wish to address the Planning Commission at this time, then we don't have anyone that is viewing, so you would have to call us. The number is 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand. If you're calling in, you press *9 on your phone. I see that we've had some people join through Zoom, so if you want to provide public comment now, you can use the raise hand function on the bottom of your screen. And Mr. Leonard will select callers who have raised their hand, calling on you either by the last 3 digits of your telephone number or by your name. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak, and when speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Again, if you've joined us through Zoom and want to provide a public comment, you can use the raise hand feature, which should be in the center of your screen underneath our pictures. All right. Seeing no hands, I will move on to item 12, which is commission proposed business. Is there any? Go ahead, Commissioner Sauvé.
I just like to look at maybe an overflow parking ordinance along with parking maximums once we get into it. Like the idea of gravel lot seems to be an interesting option when only used, 1 day a week or something, and what overflow parking might look like in other comparable cities versus just one type of parking. So just kind of adding that as a sub bullet to a lot of our parking discussion that might be coming up as one way to kind of look at it.
I would also propose that we mark this in our work plan and the parking discussion as yet another example that the EV ordinance has to change, because if you are required to build 300 spots and you build 600, you have the same EV parking requirements, and that's wrong. And it should actually be reversed in my mind. I would like to make sure that and this I think is a good example of where that comes to be. I know that there was discussion of this before. I would like to propose that we do send a communication that actually goes to ZBA and to council, highlighting some of the issues that we are seeing on the EV ordinance and some of the discussion, which is about future-proofing the current, any new parking that we are adding to this city.
So do you want to send a communication, or do you want to send a modification?
I think in my mind, it's given the timeliness of this particular issue, I would like to send a communication just saying that this is something that's come up now multiple weeks and maybe not in a row, but that we're seeing, that we are anticipating working on proposing changes to the EV ordinance. But in the meantime, should there be variances sought, our approach has been about future proofing, that if you are building something new, that the multipliers ought to apply to what is new. My sense was that idea of a multiplier at least applying to the new parking was something that was shared. So that's what in my mind would go into that communication, not telling ZBA what to do, but kind of our rationale behind it, and also letting them know that we're looking at it. But in the meantime, we know how long it takes ordinance revisions to happen. And who knows how many variances could go to ZBA in the interim. Commissioner Dish.
So I'm just a tiny bit puzzled in that so in the previous one that we talked about, which was the infill housing, we did talk about applying the EV ordinance to the parking that was new. In this case, we actually want the calculation of the EV ordinance to be on the total minimum, the required minimum number of spots. We actually don't want it to be on just what's new. You're specifying that because they've asked for a variance that's considerably lower than just what is new, right? But if we say that, we potentially could get less than what we all think is appropriate for this project, given that it's already over providing parking. And I think our feeling is you should, and there's this public access parking lot. Our thinking is that more is actually appropriate here. It's a compact site. It's not like the other one that we looked at. So I just worry that that communication actually legitimates less than what we want, although it requires more than what they're asking for.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, we don't have to send anything. And to Commissioner Sauvé's point earlier, I don't love the idea of us sending communications, but we've had a robust discussion a couple weeks now. And until our ordinance reflects that and deals with all of these potential different ways of thinking about that multiplier, I don't think that this is going to be the only variance that happens, and we may well not know about it. Mr. Leonard.
I agree with you that I think we will have more conversations about it. But the same token, I think in short order here, we are going to have results on 3 variance applications for 3 pretty different projects in that regard. And so I do think the EV ordinance, I think you're seeing these variance applications because it's a pretty impactful and it's a pretty costly add-on to development in the city. And I guess I don't have a crystal ball where we end up, but I do think that giving some space for these decisions to come out to see how they end up on these different scenarios will probably help us in that work going forward about how we want to adjust that ordinance to maybe get closer to the right balance of what we're looking for. Like I would just like in these circumstances, the first one, that's not kind of what I envisioned as sort of the intent of the EV ordinance. The intent I thought was when we're building parking, let's make sure we're future proofing it for this benefit. And no parking was being built there, but it was a requirement. This one, I think, is the other extreme. Building enough parking where enough to meet that requirement can be met. And I think the Mill Creek is somewhere in the middle. And so I guess I would just suggest that maybe it's okay for us to just recognize that this is evolving. It's probably going to evolve in our eyes. We're probably going to see other scenarios among those 3. Let's also see what happens with these applications to see if they are considered similarly or they're not by that board who does so. And then with the benefit of that, we're moving the ball forward. I think what we're struggling with is how quickly are we going to move the ball forward towards this infrastructure. And so I don't think waiting to see on these early reactions and responses and deliberations by both you and the Zoning Board of Appeal, it's a bad thing to see where we end up and move from there. So maybe that is a small 2 cents as to sort of shying away from a communication to to let the process work out in the way all of our structures are intended. And then let's learn from that and see what adjustments we want to make.
I consider that a friendly amendment to instead have the planning manager report back what happens at ZBA. We're not gonna change things overnight anyway. So, okay. I'll take that. If that's okay, as proposed business.
I feel like I'm just frustrating the planning commission all the time now, so I'm sorry.
We really, I sincerely appreciate all of the expertise that you bring to our commission. Thank you very much for guiding us.
I like a downer. All right.
All right, any others? Then we're on to item 12, which is adjournment, moved by Commissioner Lee, seconded by Commissioner Hammerschmidt. All those in favor, raise your hand. And Commissioner Dish is waving. We can't see Commissioner White. There's his hand too. All right, unanimous. Have a good night.